Hello, I'm Holly Lynn Lee, and I'm here again with my good friends and colleagues, Susan, Webster, and Chris. And in this unit, we're really diving into a resource that is, here in the United States at least, housed by the American Statistical Association called Census at Schools. But there are also international sites that are housed in various locations that collect data from students, and teachers have access to all of this data that have been collected over the years. So have any of you used the Census at Schools resource, and how have you used it in your classes? Webster? Yeah, Webster?
Well, I haven't actually used it in my classes,
okay,
but I'm very familiar with it as a resource.
Okay.
It's an interesting data resource in my opinion. So at least here in the States, I've done a few webinars with the American Statistical Association on using the Census at Schools, and I have some ideas about that. But one of the things that you understand very quickly when you start working with Census at Schools is data can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you can get a lot of information of some questionable value sometimes. So as I've looked at this data, particularly the quantitative variables that are in the data, it really reinforces that idea of cleaning the data.
Yes.
That's something that's very real,
right,
that you have to do almost always in practice. So if you just try to do a histogram of some of these variables, you'll see very quickly that there's some junk, some values that don't even make sense.
Yes.
That are completely obscuring your ability to look at the rest of the data. And you have to start the filtering process, and you have to sort of slowly filter this down until you can get something that's reasonable.
So for example, I know one of the variables is the number of text messages you have sent yesterday, something like that. And I have seen that data set where there is an answer of 10,000. You know,
right.
A student put in 10,000. That's in a day. I don't even think that's physically possible.
I don't know. There's some very
very good.
I'm not sure.
You type.
You know, so that's probably somebody with a sense of humor.
right.
You
Or
know,
mistyped.
Or mistyped. Yes.
And they're in no way typical of everyone else, right? So
Right.
As an outlier, you don't want to let that person have an impact on what you're saying about the rest of the data.
Right.
And that's where that filtering process becomes very, very important.
Yeah, I agree.
I've used Census at the schools with a course that I teach at the University of Georgia that is for high school teachers. And I have usually a mixture of pre-service teachers as well as in-service teachers in this class. And one of the main reasons I expose them to this data set is for what Webster just indicated, is that it's not a clean data set.
Yeah.
And that it is an accessible data set to where I think they could maybe develop some tasks or use it in their classrooms because it's relevant questions for their students. But at the same time, the beauty of using that data set is that it helps students see that in the real world, this is the way most data sets look.
Yeah.
They're not clean.
Right.
And that they're messy, and you need to learn how to clean them up, how to filter things.
Yeah.
When is it permissible to delete an observation of 10,000 text messages? When is it not permissible to delete an observation?
Right.
So I think that's one of the nice things about this data set is it gives a real world exposure to how data sets look.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we teach a very similar course, and so one of the ways that I use it in my course for teachers is we first look at the survey that all the students take, and so they get to understand kind of the questions that are asked of where the data comes from. So we talk about all the different measurement issues. We're able to think about the kind of variables that you're going to get from this question. What type of output are we going to get? What kind of variation might you expect, might you anticipate? So there's some anticipation there. And then I get them engaged in. So if we download a sample of this data set and we have access to all these different variables and you look through these different survey questions, what questions might you pose? And we go back to this variable. So if we're going to do a statistical investigation where we use some subset of this data, what questions are you interested in? And can we pose a good statistical question that this data set would allow us to answer? And so that's one way that I get my students engaged, and they work in groups, they pose questions, and then each group is working actually to answer a different question. So they're not all working on the same question. And then they have to actually do their investigation and report their results and share that with the class and kind of convince their classmates that they have done a thorough enough job of the investigation and supporting their argument. So that's one way that I've used it with teachers.
One other way, oftentimes in statistics, we always show, comparing groups, for example, that we always find those examples where there is a significant difference, right?
Mhm.
But if you work with the Census at Schools data, you'll see in the real world, significant differences don't happen all that
No.
often. And I think that's actually valuable. So a student shouldn't expect, my p-value should be low. It's not, there's something wrong. So you could easily use that data to show many examples of where things aren't statistically significant, and maybe
Right.
find one or two where they are.